Chapter 377. 1,400 years later, Qing Niao's burning ended early and the furnace opened again. This time, two behemoths walked in. We're relatively small, so we've decided to go in together. This way we can last longer and we'll have company. Holding hands, White Wolf and Moon Deer bid farewell to everyone and walked into the furnace. Then they saw the engravings on the wall and Qing Niao, who was looking at the records in deep thought. She seemed to have been awakened and turned around blankly. "Is it your turn?" "Yes." White Wolf grinned. "You're leaving? It's a pity that my thesis will be finished soon." Green Bird sighed and turned around to smile at them. "Don't give birth to a child." "Not as boring as you." White Wolf and Qing Niao high-fived and took the flame, causing Qing Niao's silhouette to flicker. She sighed softly. "It's not as scary as I expected, but I'm a little reluctant." She silently disappeared. The furnace closed. The White Wolf and Moon Deer lasted for 5,100 years, which was longer than expected. Next was Lord Scarlet Disaster. As a life form made of fungi, it was at a disadvantage and only lasted for 600 years before it surrendered. Before it surrendered, it was rather unhappy and shouted that it could still burn for a while longer, but it was kicked away by the impatient, lightless Manticore. The Manticore lasted for 3,100 years, and then, just like that, the behemoths walked step by step into the flames. Some were calm, some were helpless, some were angry, and some were unwilling. With the rapid flow of time, the eternal Titan Empire continued to be replaced. Wave after wave of leaders and citizens were born, grew up, and aged. They welcomed unification, then fell into division, and then quickly reunited again. Countless technologies met with failure or success. Systems were overthrown, and then rebuilt. History was like a spiral, sometimes moving forward, sometimes moving backward. It should be said that there were new changes every day, but unfortunately, other than the burning sun, there was no change in the moon. Time passed. Huaishur continued to move forward, until one day Taurus constellation told him, "I'm leaving." "So soon?" Huaishur was in disbelief. "It's been more than 40,000 years, brother." Taurus constellation sighed. Helplessly, "I can't hold on any longer." "What about the energy supply after you leave?" "I've been replaced a long time ago. The new engine has been online for 300 years. My job now is to charge people every day." The Taurus sighed. "I really miss the time when they still thought I was the thunder god. Do you still want to move forward? Let's take a walk." "There's no harm in taking a walk," Huaishur said. "Look at how healthy I am." "You're the most abnormal one, aren't you?" The Taurus constellation snorted unhappily. "Your body has expanded by at least 10 times. Why are you still growing?" "It means that stones are nutritious," Huaishur suggested. "You should eat more too." The Taurus did not reply. In front of him, the bolt of lightning slowly dissipated. Only a fleeting figure waved at him, and then quietly dissipated into the darkness. Huaishur was stunned for a long time. The last person who could talk to him had already left, which made him a little sad. But fortunately, he had recently made an electric violin and carried it on his shoulder. In the future, when he was bored, he could at least play a few. At least he felt that he had made great progress, and it was not a waste of time. He continued forward. In this way, he walked forward for another 5,000 years and slept for a long time. The messenger from the president spent 3 years in front of him, waking him up from his dream with a huge speaker and nervously waiting for his answer. Huaishur was calmer than expected. "Is it my turn?" "That's good." Huaishur nodded, put down the city behind him, opened the cover, and reached out. "Bring me the furnace core." It took half a year to transfer the furnace core. Now, Huaisher's body had expanded too much. The furnace that was originally the size of his palm was now only the size of a glass bead. "Is it your turn?" The gray bear sitting in the open furnace core sighed. "Speaking of which, you've gotten bigger again. How are you going to get in?" "I don't need to go in," Huaisher said. "I have a more convenient way." Then he opened his mouth and threw the furnace core into his throat. With a howl, he swallowed it. He smacked his lips and seriously commented to the messenger waiting below. "You guys haven't done a very good job in removing the rust these past few years. There's a smell of rust." It wasn't the sweet and sour taste he had originally expected. It was really a bit disappointing. Then he was ignited. He felt the flames rise from his abdomen and envelop him in an instant. It was as if his body was going to disintegrate inch by inch, bringing with it an intense burning pain. In the pain, he couldn't help but bend down, suppressing the roar in his throat. Only the melted steel left from his body, turning into a metal lake with a radius of 1,000 miles. In the boiling metal lake, he took a deep breath, looked up to the sky, and spat out the fire that had been passed down for 50,000 years. In the fleeting light of the fire, the figures of giant beasts appeared. Gazing into Huaisher's eyes, they smiled and waved goodbye. "I'll leave it to you." "Yes, leave it to me." Huaisher nodded, but no one responded. Those figures dissipated. The intense pain of his bones growing burst out from his body. Countless organs roared as they welcomed the transformation in the fire. A pair of huge wings broke out from his back, revealing a ferocious and sharp appearance. Huaisher looked up to the sky and roared. His huge tail swept across, bursting out the last dragon's roar in this deathly silent world. Now he had already welcomed the final transformation in the flames. The terrifying body that was beyond the imagination of ordinary people skyrocketed again. In the cover of the flames, sharp dragon scales grew out from under the armor. The inherited flames spread to the original bareback, making the bareback more and more solemn in the flames, forming a solemn outline like the sun. And the eternal Titan Empire was suspended in the middle of the sun like a bright pearl. The eternal empire and the eternal giant beast seemed to have merged into one. Huaisher had truly emerged from his original form and become the only master of this world, the one who carried the world, the final dragon, Bahamut. Now, the world-devouring dragon spread his wings in this dead world and grinned. "Let's go." He soared into the sky, carrying the sun and the world on his back, and once again embarked on the endless journey. Just like that, 10,000 years, 20,000 years, in a trance, time accelerated crazily as if it was fast-forwarded tens of thousands of times. There was no longer any sense of reality. In the long journey, the world behind him seemed to have evolved to the extent that he could not recognize it at all. With the departure of the scholars, this city had long been handed over to these evolved races. And now, they seemed to have become a blurry light and shadow. There was not even the slightest difference between each of them. "Thank you for your long blessings, divine Great Spirit." Thousands of figures emerged from the light and shadow, saying goodbye to him. "Today, we welcome the final evolution, abandoning the mortal shell and merging into the ancient source." "Has it been decided?" Huaisher asked. 2 million people, not a single one of them is hesitant or fearful. Such gratifying fruits are all thanks to your selfless dedication. The people in the light and shadow respectfully bowed. "We shall merge into the silver ocean and enter a unified realm, no longer being your burden. This is our final attack against the apocalypse. Please bear witness to it all." "Then go." Huaisher nodded. "I have no objections. Then we shall meet again, Great Spirit." The people in the light and shadow seemed to smile. "I hope that after the end of the apocalypse, we will be able to meet again in the new world." Goodbye then. Huaisher lowered his eyes and stared at the figures of light as they walked into the bright light, one by one, merging into the brilliant silver ocean. In the boundless silver sea, a ray of light leaped and approached, as if it was reaching out to pinch his face. Finally, it returned to his back and merged into the corona of light, pure and clear splendor sprinkled down, as if it had turned into the moon. "Let's go, my friend." A familiar voice sounded in his ears, then immediately dissipated. Huaisher chuckled softly, spread his wings, and flew into the dark distance. His journey was not over yet. She did not have that kind of talent, and she did not have a dream that must be realized. Although there were some small impulses occasionally, in the end, it was just that. What's wrong with the children nowadays? One or two of them are either frighteningly stubborn or insufferably rational. The old man raised his eyebrows. "I thought—" She was silent for a moment before saying, "Seriously, you will need some changes." "I actually think so too." The girl sighed softly. "But not long ago, I realized that in fact, the thing I don't desire the most is change." She did not need to change. Even if her father and mother's relationship was broken and they divorced, even if her mother planned to remarry and have a child, even if her efforts were not rewarded and reality was getting farther and farther away from the scene she had hoped for. Things in the world were not as one wished, but she could understand all of this. The reality that belonged to her was already perfect enough. Everything was predestined. In fact, everything had already been set in order a long time ago. There was no need for her to add any more unnecessary details. No matter how difficult it was to accept, it was not an excuse to resist and deceive herself. She just needed some time, a little space of her own, a place where she could temporarily escape everything, and a friend who could help her leave all of this. Just like running away from home, there would be a day when she would have to look back at the way home. She was well aware of this, and she did not intend to delay this day for too long, just for a while. As long as she had a short night of freedom, she could go back and face everything she needed to face. Like a child who had left home, willfully playing, running on the streets, trying everything her parents did not allow. This was her night of freedom. Now, the night of the witch was over. She should go home, even if the outside world was magnificent and huge. "I understand." The old man chuckled softly and touched her hair lovingly. "You are stronger than I thought, but are you sure you don't need my help?" As she spoke, she looked out of the window at the young man who was smiling foolishly by the river. She shook her head and sighed. "You don't know if he has a strange brain circuit or is a natural scumbag. Even if the world ends, he won't understand, right?" "No need." Fu Yi looked away from the back of the figure. "I changed my mind." He is really a good friend, better than I expected." She was silent for a moment and suddenly said, "Unfortunately, I am not." It was too easy to deceive such a person. Fu Yi had a deep understanding of this. As long as you smiled at him, he would smile back. As long as you were his friend, he would not guard against you. As long as you asked, he would give. He would do his best. He would never disappoint. Because of this, she did not want to say her most embarrassing request. Would he agree? No, it should be asked, would he refuse? And then, would he be loyal to this relationship? No, would he betray her? And then what? Would she be happy? The most important thing was, would he feel happy? This was not right? Wasn't love mutual? If it was one-sided demand and one-sided dependence, wouldn't it be like a beggar? Thinking about it carefully, from the past until now, she seemed to be constantly trying to rely on others, relying on her father's doting, relying on her mother's support, relying on her appearance to get love, relying on her authority to ignore the rules, and then relying on her glib words to get friends when she was at her loneliest. Maybe she was good at this. Maybe even if she relied on others, no one would say anything. But she did not know why. She did not want to rely on those things anymore. Just looking at the back of the figure outside the window, as long as she compared them, she would know that such a parasitic life was not happy at all. It was just begging. In the silence, the old man seemed to notice the girl's disappointment. He raised the box in his hand and handed it to her. Smoke. Fu-Yi stretched out her hand, but the box was taken back. No. The old man grinned, like a child who succeeded in a prank. He patted her head. You are still a child. Have some tea. The fragrant and warm teacup came to Fu-Yi's hand. Evelyn. The old man suddenly said, Yes. My name is Evelyn, Evelyn of the Chachel family. The old man smiled and told her, The registered name is Cycle. Although I am a little late to introduce myself, I hope to be your friend. Fu-Yi was stunned for a long time. After a long time, she lowered her head. Her eyes were filled with tears and seemed to be a little red. My name is Fu-Yi. It means rely on. Fu-Yi, I know. The old man stretched out his hand forcefully and held her hand. He shook it and nodded happily. Then we are friends. Please rest assured and rely on me, even if the time we spent together is so short. She paused for a moment, and her expression became solemn. She was serious and dignified. She asked in a deep voice, Then, in the end, I have a question to ask you. In the short, uneasy silence, the corners of her mouth suddenly curled up, revealing a gentle smile. Did you have fun? Fu-Yi was stunned. After a long time, she nodded vigorously. Yes. Then, the smile became gratified, full of joy and satisfaction. The old man reached out and gently hugged the girl in front of him. Then smile, my friend. She kissed the girl's forehead and said goodbye softly. I hope that we can meet again at the source after a long time. You are about to embark on your own journey, and I will return to my home. But before that, she squeezed her eyes like a child preparing for a prank and told her with a smile, I have prepared a surprise for you. He sat on the stairs and stared blankly at the traffic in the distance. The doorman didn't know what he wanted to do, but because of his ID, he didn't dare to drive silently in their seats. He could only stand in the distance, gazing ahead, and watch the people who had come from all over the world. Light footsteps came from behind him. Some were young, rather sturdy, some were fat, looking dog walked some were thin, passed by some him, were ugly, stopped, some were and then beautiful, skillfully raised one of its hind legs. Farmers with sunburn marks on their faces, with a strong and workers smell. With calluses on their fingers were sitting on the same bench. Proudly. It was a strange swung sight. Past the tip. This place should be a temple, but there was even no a dog statue in the temple. The huge stone foundation only carried the projection of the realm of discovery that was constantly when he took a closer look under the projection, he couldn't help but the calm voice continued. The classic black and white color, the continuation, the icy blue eyes, to the greatest unruly gaze and the devilish smile, the middle-aged man, as well as the overly large projection. Why did it look so familiar? Read the report from the continuation dog looking at him. The symbiosis of disdain. The sole existence of individuals? Why sure? Genetic inheritance? Or is in the direction of the continuation of civilization? A panicked voice sounded. I believe that this is the final question that the fallen creator why did you left for all his colleagues. I'm sorry, I haven't bought a question that is worth us spending a lifetime to explore. Why are you here? This is not just an apocalyptic response. Why turned back helplessly among and looked at the embarrassed, the crucial biomaterialization. He then looked at the husky, also known as that ether sublimation, happily at Fu-Yi's will be uploaded in the preload area and then pointed at himself. 3 secret instruments. What's your name? Next 3 cycles. It's a long story. According to our calculations, this technology has successfully set back violently the Doomsday clock that was sweeping Weischer's face. This is a great and merciful creation for all the ordinary people in the present realm. Proudly to this day, the legacy of Utopia is still constantly guarding the entire world. The behemoth in dogskin sneezed was far more than squatted down obediently next to solemnly. Its noble head was raised, even more than we imagined, and its icy blue eyes including a bright and new full of expression in the study looking of the very majestic. In the indescribable awkwardness, final experiment, we successfully and pointed at a rope that was exposed in Weischer's by simulating the food chain of ranchers. Can you lend me the rope? Our results even shoot up someone close to the category of the beast of eternal life. Open the saddlebag. Not only did we establish the collar inside and corresponding and the dog in front of between the two, he was stunned for a long time. We also got more than we expected. His expression, even if those present did not understand the complicated theories and terms circulating among scholars, but he couldn't help but understood the meaning of this result from their assistance. It was as if he finally felt this result was not so much a surprise. He was overjoyed, as it was more appropriate to call it a shock. Please be friends with Fu. The reason was that the idea was too crazy. Like a heavenly steed soaring across the sky. It was comparable to a high-speed train driving on the highway, rampaging, ignoring the rules and taboos as if they were nothing. He completely regarded the extremely dangerous elemental of destruction as a lab rat in a cage. After a long period of research and countless failures, he finally succeeded in connecting the two on the same main axis under a specific perspective. A perfect balance and commonality had been found between the two. Using this as a foundation, he built a set of completely feasible theoretical tools. No, it should be called a bridge. Whether it was analyzing the beast of eternal life by studying the rancher, or researching the existence of the rancher by studying the beast of eternal life, the massive amount of research on the two would be transformed through this bridge. Even if there were limitations, it was still equivalent to opening up a brand new path. A new field of abyssal biology would be created in Evelyn's hands. From now on, there would be countless scholars carrying on the torch and following the path she blazed. She unreservedly gave him a fish. This lady still made a great contribution to the present realm in the last minute before she passed away. Jaeger propped up his crutches, tried to prop up his calves, straightened his body, and said solemnly, "Here, I propose that everyone stand up and observe a moment of silence for the passing of this wise woman." Without hesitation, no matter where they came from, no matter where they were going, whether it was the Directorate of Defense, the Preservation Court, the Technical Department, the Archaeological Team, or even the Stone Cauldron Society, the Bronze Eye, and so on outside the Astronomical Society, no matter where the representatives came from, at this moment, under Jaeger's initiative, all the participants stood up in unison and bowed their eyes solemnly to the old woman who appeared from the projection, paying the highest respect. A full 3 minutes. Even if it was only 3 minutes, the whole world stopped moving for her passing. This was the funeral of the Creator. Chapter 382. Name: Weischer. Age: 17 years old. Professional student, right? Yes. Part-time supervisor of Exine High Astronomy Association, disaster musician, abyss chef, and a bunch of other stuff. In the security room, Weischer sat behind the chair and introduced himself sincerely. He then placed his ID on the table. The security guard had an expression that said, "Are you King kidding me?" He had probably never seen such a serious Chinibu before. After a long silence, he could not figure out what this guy wanted to do. Could he be the child of the factory's leader? No, wait, there was no one with the surname Hui in the factory. What's the reason for your visit? The security guard tapped the pen on the table. Who are you looking for? Do you have a way to contact them? Do you want me to call them out for you? It would be great if you could call them out for me. The young man sitting across the table also laughed. I'm here to look for the boss of this biopharmaceutical company, Ding Nank, and his 6 accomplices. They violated the border material control regulations, and were arrested by the supervisor of Exine High Astronomy Association, which is me, although this thing is usually referred to as a black letter. As he spoke, the young man pulled out a heavy longsword from his saddlebag. He was stunned for a moment before he awkwardly put it back. Sorry, I took the wrong one. It's this time, a letter with a black cover was placed on the table and slowly pushed over. It stopped before the security guard. The security guard frowned. What the hell? He picked up the letter in confusion and looked around. After confirming that this was a prank, his expression became more and more unhappy. Then he saw the little red dots that fell on his body from outside the window. They were like little stars in the sky, twinkling and twinkling, locked on by the infrared sight. He raised his head blankly and finally saw the suppression team poking their heads out from the high wall outside the window and the shiny black barrels in their hands. The Good Brothers' long guns had a persuasive power that words could not compare to. In an instant, the security guard understood Huaishir's intention. He obediently knelt on the ground and covered his head with his hands. I don't know anything. I'm just a worker. The Good Brothers who rushed in didn't care about this. Regardless of whether it was a human or a ghost, they would first pin it on the neck and slowly settle the score later. Following Huaishir's signal, they instantly jumped over the wall and launched an attack inside. His movements were extremely fast, like a hot knife through butter. Huaishir cheered him on from behind. Charge! Charge! Good luck, comrades! Although the Russian Federation is big, we have nowhere to go. Behind us is M.O. Before he could finish his sentence, Old Fu almost kicked him from behind. Shut up! Don't interfere with the command. He pointed to the side with a look of disdain. Old Wang, take out your phone and let the kid play with it for a while. Don't let him cause trouble. I'm a dignified inspector. I'm just trying to boost morale. How am I interfering with the command? You call that depressing? How is that boosting morale? All right, then how about I perform a Bach unaccompanied cello suite for everyone? Look, Old Wang just looked over. He wants to hear it. Old Wang, who was next to them, looked up at the sky. He didn't want to continue the conversation at all. If he wasn't well informed, he wouldn't have known. There were rumors in the bureau that Huaishir had been taken home by the director's daughter and slept in the same room every day. It was said that the director didn't even dare to interfere. He heard from Secretary Xiao Li that when he came to deliver the documents, he even heard him arguing with the family dog at home. Maybe he was under too much pressure these 2 days and was angry. He was thinking about when to tactfully persuade the director to see a psychiatrist. He was distracted and didn't pay attention to the quarreling two people at all, until the sound of gunfire came from the depths of the pharmaceutical factory. The roar was endless. Soon, his expression changed. These bastards had grenades. At this moment, he looked at Director Fu and asked for instructions. Director Fu also knew that this was not the time to quarrel. He suppressed his anger and glared at Huaishir. What he meant was, "What are you waiting for? Go." Huaishir took out his phone and sat at the side. He looked as if he didn't understand why his uncle was glaring at him. Old Fu's face turned red and green. He gritted his teeth and stomped his feet. He pulled out his pistol and prepared to charge. But he was immediately stopped by Huaishir. What a joke! If anything happened to him, how would he face his good brother in the future? Okay, I'll do it, okay? He pressed Old Fu down on the chair. Brother Xiang Wang, you're precious. Don't take risks so easily. Old Fu's face turned green when he saw that Huaishir had changed his address from Old Fu to Brother Xiang Wang. However, he couldn't get angry. He could only suppress the pain in his liver. Huaishir sighed in his heart. I'll bring him a few bottles of liver protection pills during the new year. It's not easy for this brother of mine. After taking advantage of him, Huaishir finally patted her, but and walked to the front. All the resisting enemies had hidden in a 4-story office building. Now, they had sealed the windows and were holding all kinds of prohibited weapons to confront the suppression forces outside. They shouted that they wanted to negotiate. It was a pity that this place was too close to the city. It was not convenient for tanks and mortars to be used. Otherwise, according to Director Foostemper, he wouldn't care about the damn judges. Drag them all to the main cannon of the tank to talk. Weisher walked to the bunker in front of him and took the loudspeaker from the captain. He stuck his head out and shouted, "Listen up, the people inside. You've been surrounded by me." The curtains on the second floor suddenly shook. Weisher suddenly shrank his head and felt a shrill whistle fly over his head. He was stunned for a moment and then became furious. "Damn it, I'm the Shinhai Inspector, Jinling Decapitation King, Disaster Musician, and the Abyss Cooking Demon. I'm the rising star of the administration. I'm a 4th-class military officer of the Astronomy Association. I'm here to negotiate with you. Not only do you not surrender, you even dare to fight back. You're revolting. Fine, since you don't want to eat prison food, then I'll treat the whole village to a meal." He rummaged through his saddlebag for a long time and found a bottle that looked like a wine jug from a pile of junk. He weighed it in his hand and threw it into the door that had been blown open by the suppression forces. The bottle drew an arc in the air and quickly fell behind the door. The lackey sent by the smugglers behind the door saw a black thing thrown in and almost jumped up in shock. Then he saw the thing hit the wall and exploded. A handful of scarlet things splashed out and flowed all over the ground. 2 more drops fell on his hand. He lowered his head to look at them and carefully sniffed them. He was in disbelief. Is this blood? Then he saw a faint layer of dark green sprouting quickly in the 2 drops of blood. It looked like mold. He felt that he couldn't breathe. It was difficult to breathe, and his body quickly became numb. Not only him, but everyone in the hall at the moment felt their bodies become stiff. Countless strains of mold sprouted in their mouths, noses, and the corners of their eyes, spreading all the way to their lungs. Half a minute later, everyone who could move could not help but bend over and vomit violently. But all they vomited was their own blood. The fierce poison from the abyss directly caused a massive hemorrhage in their stomachs. Not long after the blood flowed out, it turned into blood clots covered in dark green mold. Not long after, the 10 or so people who had been stubbornly resisting were all paralyzed on the ground. They were out of breath. Seeing that after Weisher threw in a bag of things, the inside quieted down as if it had been sprayed with insecticide. All the good brothers of the suppression forces were stunned. Only Weisher lit a cigarette with a lonely expression and sighed to the sky. "It's poison," he said. He said, "I poisoned the blood." Simply put, he used his own beginner-level alchemy to release his own blood. After pouring in a pile of origin substance, calamity ash, and 2 drops of azure crown dragon blood, he didn't care what kind of person he was. He made a pot of stew and used the crudest method to stimulate the poison in it. Then he put it in a bottle. The shelf life was about 12 hours. He just needed to drink it as soon as he opened the bottle. When necessary, he could use it as a blood bag and transfuse it back to himself. After all, it was his blood and his poison. He couldn't poison himself. Excluding the speechless look in Crow's eyes, he felt that he was a genius. After lingering for a long time and not leaving, he finally took 2 submachine guns and 5 or 6 magazines from the Special Affairs Department. He finally came out from behind cover and carried the 2 submachine guns to the hall behind the door. "Hello, where are you, fellow countrymen?" He yelled at the top of his lungs. "Astronomy will give you warmth." Unfortunately, no one responded to him. There was only the sound of labored breathing. Weisher couldn't help but sigh. These days, No one wanted the warmth that was delivered to their doorstep. When he thought about how the Special Affairs Department had invited them to tea for free, Huaishur was moved by their noble character and unquestionable integrity. After being moved for 5 or 6 seconds, he heard the faint sound of a whistle coming from upstairs. Suddenly, hoarse moans could be heard from behind him. Huaishur didn't even turn his head. He aimed behind him and pulled the trigger. After a series of gunshots, a guy covered in green fur fell to the ground. Immediately afterwards, even more moans could be heard from the ground. The lackeys, who had been on the verge of death, began to squirm and crawl up from the ground. It was as if they had turned into zombies. Their faces were pale, and their eyes glowed with a dark green light. This was the sign of origin substance burning itself. Huaishur knew with a single glance that this group of people was completely dead. Originally, even if they had been poisoned by Huaishur, they would only have to stay in the ICU for a few days. But now, it seemed that this group of people had been injected with the zombie serum. Once they were stimulated by something, they would quickly transform into something that was neither human nor ghost. They would madly attack all living things in front of them. Even when they died, they wouldn't know that they had become someone else's cannon fodder. That's why they dared to get involved in border smuggling when they couldn't do anything else. Are they afraid that they won't die quickly enough? Huaishur shook his head. He raised his gun and prepared to give them a quick death. Immediately afterwards, he felt the ground beneath his feet shake, and a cracking sound came from above him. As countless cracks grew, the heavy concrete floor came crashing down on Huaishur. In the blink of an eye, a fleeting shadow jumped out from the countless concrete fragments. Before he could react, it suddenly appeared behind Huaishur. The sickle in its hand chopped down at his neck. Then he saw Huaishur raise his hand and let go of the weapon in his hand. From under Huaishur's feet, a pitch-black shadow quickly rose up and caught the 2 submachine guns falling from the air. It faced him and revealed the narrow darkness in the barrels. Then, the red glove pulled the trigger. Dazzling flames spewed out from the darkness. Chapter 383. There was a change in the armpit. Just as you were about to sneak in and cut off the neck of a little bastard, you suddenly realized that the person you were facing was a substitute. Furthermore, the substitute had 2 submachine guns in his hands. The 2 black barrels of the guns were raised, and the trigger was pulled. That fleeting shadow suddenly trembled and actually flew backwards without touching the ground. The sickle in its hand was lifted up and twisted in the air like a key. An invisible gravitational force burst out from it, pulling the red glove's bullets into a bundle and wrapping around the hook. It was like burning red peanuts floating around a curved iron branch. As the red gloves continued to shoot, more and more bullets stopped on the hook. In the end, the hook seemed to be overwhelmed. It was burned red by the kinetic energy, and layers of cracks appeared. Fortunately, before the collapse, there was finally the sound of an empty magazine, which made the attacker breathe a sigh of relief. As he waved his hand, countless bullets fell to the ground and crackled. It was a narrow escape. As countless fragments of the ceiling continued to fall, a burly and bloated figure fell straight toward Huaishur from the 2nd floor. The guy was like an iron ball. The wriggling fat all over his body had a metallic sheen. As he moved, 2 big hands suddenly closed, 10 fingers interlocked, aimed at Huaishur's head, and suddenly smashed down like a volleyball. The wind was fierce. The attacker had no doubt about the power of this punch. This punch, even if it hit the front of a truck, could overturn it. It was easy to deal with such a body of flesh and blood. But then he saw that Huaishur stood firmly in place. His feet were separated from his shoulders, and his knees were slightly bent. Huaishur took a deep breath. He raised his empty hands behind his head as if he was holding something invisible. He roared with all his might. Then, the metallic sheen condensed in the air and gathered between his 10 fingers. It multiplied inch by inch, and in an instant outlined the outline of a ferocious iron hammer. It looked like the ferocious head of a giant beast. The front part of the hammer was covered in layers of scales, vaguely forming the outline of a wolf's head. There were even 2 curved and sharp horns extending forward from the wolf's head. At the end of the hammerhead, the tightly shut scales and carapace suddenly trembled, and the 6 nozzles opened abruptly. Endless pain converged into a blazing torrent, spurting out from the nozzles, bursting forth with power like a rocket engine. As the hammer broke through the air, a roar could be heard. It sounded like the angry howl of a giant wolf, setting off the lingering sound of rolling thunder. In the blink of an eye, Huaishir's raised hammer accelerated to an unimaginable speed. Following Huaishir's movements, it smashed forward, aiming directly at the bloated sublimator that was descending from the sky, unreservedly placing all of his power and momentum into that strike. "Let's go." It was as if he had kicked a dead pig while walking in the grass. She heard a low, muffled sound. A weak feeling of blockage came from the handle of the hammer. Then, as if a bubble had been popped, another explosion sounded from the thunder. Boom! Before he landed, the fat ascendant let out a blood-curdling scream and was sent flying in front of Huaishir by this attack. The swollen body quickly deformed under the impact of the hammer. At the point of impact, a dent suddenly spread out, setting off layers of waves of flesh. Wherever the hammer passed, the fatty flesh that glowed with a metallic light fell apart. Only a waterfall of blood spurted out from the big hole in the chest. Dragging a blood-red trail, he smashed through one wall after another, rolling on the ground pathetically. Finally, after rolling for dozens of meters, he finally stopped in front of the wall of the factory. He turned into a softball. Witnessing this terrifying attack, the sickle-wielding sublimator didn't even remember to be afraid. Instead, it instinctively seized this opportunity and charged forward once more. It wanted to go around the red gloves and attack Huaishir's defenseless back. Backstab. Then he felt a chill on his back and in his heart. Looking down, he saw a gorgeous sacrificial knife piercing through his chest, but there was no blood spurting out because all the blood was absorbed by the sacrificial knife. He could only feel his life rapidly draining away. How was this possible? He turned his head with difficulty and saw a fleeting black shadow, as well as an old face shrouded in gray fog. The eyes were malicious, and the old face was grinning strangely at him. It was like a ghost. No, it was indeed a ghost, but how? He looked in front of him in disbelief and saw that it was indeed the red gloves blocking Huaishir's back. He could not understand. Why were there 2? He fell to the ground pathetically, the hook in his hand falling out. After losing the supply of origin substance, it finally broke inch by inch. Before he completely fainted, he only heard Huaishir's voice of praise. "Chiwen, well done!" The second ghost. Ever since he returned from the Night of the Witch, the mountain ghost's sacred mark had grown again, causing the Nibelungen ring to welcome a new growth, giving birth to a second ghost. And for some reason, when Huaishir took out the Book of Destiny and slapped it on the forehead, Chiwen suddenly appeared, becoming the second tool. What the hell is going on? Huaishir couldn't understand at all. Does this mean that everyone who has a grudge against me will never be able to reincarnate? If this was in some fantasy novel, it would definitely be the plot of a big villain boss, something like imprisoning the enemy's soul and torturing it for hundreds of years. If this boss was even a little more despicable, it would become someone who couldn't be provoked and would be toyed with someone who couldn't be provoked with chi. Wen's face, Huaishir trembled just thinking about this scene. Even though he felt uncomfortable, he quickly discovered that this second tool was quite useful. Unlike the Red Glove's direct and unyielding fighting style, this old guy was very bad, sinister, and cowardly. Without Huaishi's command, it would definitely hide in a corner and never face the enemy head-on. Its old eyes were always looking at someone's back, as if it was always ready to lock them up, shooting from the back, stunning them, sprinkling lime, poisoning them. It was as dirty as it could get. Throwing these two out, one pulling aggro and one stabbing in the back, seemed to work quite well together. It was just that it got dirtier and dirtier, which made Huaishi occasionally feel that this evil duo really couldn't be kept. It wasn't just Huaishi. Seeing their own people being taken away by such a dirty trick, the group of smugglers all sucked in a breath of cold air. King poisoning and stabbing in the back. Who exactly was the villain? Seeing the two people who were the best at fighting being taken away like vegetables, the expressions of the other people suddenly turned ugly. The Social Security Bureau is rushing over again. The person spying by the window turned around with a frightened expression. Second brother, what should we do? Grab your weapons and take down that little bastard from the Astronomy Society first. I don't believe the Social Security Bureau dares to do anything. Second brother took out his key, opened the secret cabinet in his office, took out the metal box inside, and distributed the weapons with a cold expression. At this point, we can only fight to the death. Don't think about being lenient after surrendering. I've never seen anyone who can successfully lie in front of the Astronomy Society. The things we've done are enough to kill us dozens of times. Even if we don't succeed, we'll have a quick death. If we're caught alive, we'll beg for death. The gloomy tone made everyone shiver. Immediately, they clenched the weapons in their hands, and a murderous look appeared on their faces. A successful pre-war mobilization had strengthened everyone's willpower. Some people even couldn't help but applaud and praise. Outside the door, in an instant, everyone in the room felt a sudden chill. Before they could even react, the door exploded. Literally, in the eruption of flames, it was torn apart into countless metal shards that whizzed through the air, turning the room into a mess. Then, the heavy sound of steel rubbing against the ground was heard, and sparks flew. The slightly skinny young man dragged a hammer that didn't match his style at all as he walked through the door step by step and smiled at his stunned opponents. Looks like you've finished your pre-war mobilization. I'm not late, am I? The hammer that was condensed from pain slowly rose again, and the 6 nozzles at the end ignited with blazing flames. It illuminated the smile on Huaishi's face. If possible, I hope you don't resist. Otherwise, I'm not too confident that I'll leave your corpses intact. Boom! The loud sound of something breaking through the air burst out again. As Huaishi spun around, the flaming hammer roared in the air and drew a fierce arc. In the blink of an eye, a sublimator who pounced on him was smashed against the wall. It was very even. The thickness difference was no more than 3 centimeters. It was just that the liquid was a little ugly when it flowed down, making everyone's face pale. Don't be afraid. At the critical moment, someone stood up and shouted angrily, "Did you forget what second brother said just now?" Second brother? Huaishi didn't understand and looked behind them. Are you talking about the one who ran away when I came in? An awkward silence suddenly fell. It was only now that they realized that their second brother had disappeared without them knowing. Only a secret door that couldn't be closed in time proved that he had once existed. That's why I hate smugglers like you. You don't know what professionalism is at all. Huaishi sighed and raised the hammer again. You don't seem very smart. I want to ask you where Ding Nank is, but I'm afraid you don't know. I'll try my best to give you a quick. It turned out that the Special Affairs Division was still useful. After Huaishi smashed the limbs of these guys who were in the way, The suppression team told him through the radio that his second brother had confessed. He took the initiative to surrender. He knelt down cleanly. It was completely different from what he had told his brothers. The moment the suppression team rushed in, he pounced on them. Before Meng Nan's brothers could react, he had already told them everything. Regardless of how skillfully he wanted to clear his name, at least he told them something. For example, he told them about the account book and the place where the important goods were stored. Now, Old Fu was checking the smuggled goods and cursing along the way. There was no doubt that this was a huge case. However, even though he told them a lot of things, his second brother couldn't tell them where Ding Nank was. According to him, Ding Nank's whereabouts had been strange since last week. The night before, 2 guests came, and Ding Nank was in charge of receiving them personally. He didn't let anyone else interfere. The 2 guests left the next morning. After they came back, Ding Nank didn't show his face again. It was as if he had disappeared. No one knew if Ding Nank had been silenced by his own guests because he knew too much. Before Weisher rushed in to enforce the law, everyone was still discussing whether or not they should split up and return to Gao Village. Amazing! Weisher was stunned. They're really all traitors. With such a group of good brothers, even if Ding Nank died, he would be so happy that he would laugh out loud, right? No, I don't feel like laughing at all. A hoarse voice sounded from outside the door. Chapter 384. No, I actually don't want to laugh at all. Outside the door, a hoarse voice sounded. Even if they split all the money and ran away, I don't care. After all, I didn't expect this motley crew to be useful from the beginning. What's more, it's the astronomy club. The voice said, if I'm not wrong, it should be the Guillotine King of Jinling, right? As Weisher turned around, he saw a figure in the originally empty corridor. He stood in front of the broken window, in a ray of light, but the trace was exceptionally fleeting, like a bubble. The middle-aged man had slightly long hair, and his beard seemed to have not been shaved for a long time. His expression was cold, but unexpectedly, there was no resentment nor anger. He was just calm, even if he was deep in the middle of a siege. Ding Nank stared at him, then nodded in greeting. I've heard a lot about you, Prince of Paradise. Or should I call you Your Highness? Huh, you're also my fan? Weisher tilted his head, puzzled. Seeing your nest being destroyed, you're not angry? You're angry because a 10-year-old umbrella is broken. Ding Nank laughed mockingly. It has completed its mission, so it's not a pity that it's damaged and destroyed. I can still get a new one. If possible, I really want to give you a thumbs up for your tolerance. Weisher slowly raised his eyebrows. However, I can't help but feel a little angry when I find that someone treats astronomy as harmless as rain. As he said that, he picked up the sledgehammer in his hand again and asked seriously, since you came back after running away, I think you must be prepared to be hammered to death by me, right? Of course. Ding Nank grinned and laughed mockingly. 3 folding knives slid out of his cuffs and were held lightly by one hand. With a flick of his fingers, the crisscrossed blades deftly unfolded at his fingertips. Black, red, white. The 3 folding knives looked like 3 butterflies made of iron. They told me that you're very strong. He paused and said seriously, I don't really believe it. You should be the kind of anti-fan who hasn't even watched my live streams, right? Weisher sighed. What a pity. You should have seen it. Without any shame or modesty, he said seriously, as long as you read it, you will realize I am indeed very strong. Pucci. Ding Nank was amused by Weisher's words. He didn't even know if he should say that this kid was boasting shamelessly. In fact, he was well aware of Weisher's battle record. He didn't look down on them at all. Just as he was about to open his mouth to speak, Weisher stomped his feet. Use steps. To be more precise, It should be a special application method to increase speed and agility to the limit through multiple steps within a short distance, crushing steps. It was as if he was taking small steps, but with each step, his speed increased by another point. Wherever he passed, under the ravaging of his feet, the cement floor was scraped out a deep gully. Countless overlapping footprints were deeply carried into the floor, forming a slightly curved trajectory that extended forward. And with countless twists and turns, in an instant, Huaisher twisted his arm, spurting out flames from the hammer of pain, and smashed it toward Ding Nank in front of him. The bubble burst. The entire floor of the second floor suddenly shook. No, it should be said that the entire building was shaking from the sudden impact. Countless pieces of the floor fell apart and fell down. Even the load-bearing walls were covered with cracks. In midair, Huaisher saw Ding Nank's figure appear in front of him again, like a nightmare. The speed was unbelievably fast, almost exceeding the limit of Huaisher's vision. And when he saw the other party's scarlet eyes and the sharp canine teeth exposed from the mouth, he suddenly realized a vampire. However, there were no traces of commandments. It was not a vampire of the Roman lineage. It seemed to be a vampire of the American lineage. It was not Gabriel's Road of Radiance, but the blue-crowned dragon lineage that was formed in history after Van Helsing abandoned commandments and beliefs and embraced the miracle of the abyss. They were too familiar with each other. Huaisher grinned and didn't even need to think. The hammer of pain in his hand suddenly became 3, and the hand behind his back naturally pulled out the sword of virtue from the buckle of the saddle bag and blocked in front of him. Prediction. The next moment, the cold light of 2 folding knives whistled past the sword ridge. In midair, Ding Nank ignored gravity and bounced between the walls. In just over a second, he launched 6 attacks. If not for the help of the Mirror of Nothingness, Huaisher would have been almost unable to block such a frequency of ferocious attacks. Among the 3 comprehensions he had now obtained, the true essence of nothingness, yesterday's phantom, and the soul link could make his words more persuasive and empathize with and understand the situation of others. Yesterday's phantom brought about the miraculous effect of looking back on the past and washing away the haze, making up for the latent flaws and shortcomings in Huaisher's mind, allowing him to transcend the haze of the past. The effect of the true essence of nothingness was the simplest. Hearing and seeing clearly, it directly enhanced Huaisher's perception, allowing him to see through the enemy's weaknesses and details that he usually didn't notice. Similarly, this was the strongest of all the comprehensions that Huaisher had, because in the process of comprehending, Huaisher's soul directly merged with the strange mirror used to worship the sun witches in Yamatai Hell, forming the mirror of nothingness today. In an instant, a large amount of life force was burned, magnifying Huaisher's premonition and awareness of death, allowing Huaisher to briefly deduce the enemy's next move and fatal attack, and make the most correct response within the scope of his ability. Although he still couldn't block what should be blocked, such as when a passing Bichimos spat at him, Huaisher still had to die. But if he encountered a problem that he could deal with within the scope of his ability, then he could easily solve it. For example, now, Ding Nank was completely useless. As a traitorous demon hunter who had personally played the role of a vampire and even experienced an advancement, Huaisher was not afraid of the opponent's combat power, which was directly 1 level above him. He raised the sword of virtue and the sacrificial knife with both hands. The frequency of the metronome increased. During the short fall, Huaisher countered and countered, his defense impeccable, and even stabbed at Ding Nank with the accelerated melody of CC. A crack was torn open on the vampire's face. Disfigurement. Stepping on the lingering sound of the broken floor, Huaisher landed and finally stood firm in the ruins. He raised the sword of virtue in his hand and pointed it at Ding Nank's face. Suddenly, he asked, "Can you play the cello?" Without waiting for Ding Nank to respond, he grinned and answered his own question. "I can, and he must be the best cello player among all the ascendants." Yu's steps accelerated, and the broken floor under Huaishi's feet collapsed again, and Huaishi had already shot out, charging at Ding Nank and slashing down with his blade. The concert from the abyss began again. The musicians of Calamity played the sound of death, with his favorite Bach's unaccompanied overture. As the opening, Huaishi launched a brazen attack. In an instant, he pierced through the defense of the folding knife, and another sword wound appeared on Ding Nank's body. Ding Nank's flesh and blood wriggled, but the wound could not close. This was natural. The evil physique of a vampire was ineffective in front of Huaishi's sword of positive energy. The sacrificial knife was even more vicious. It directly sucked blood, even the blood of a vampire. It was simply cannibalism. However, after noticing the strangeness of the weapon in Huaishi's hand, Ding Nank no longer gave him any advantage. Without warning, he suddenly retreated and widened the distance between them. He swung his hand. In his hand, 3 folding knives suddenly flew out, circling in the air, and flew toward Huaishi like butterflies. White's speed was the most terrifying. If not for the help of the realm of nothingness, Huaishi would not have had any time to react. The power of the black folding knife was not like such a short blade at all. Instead, it was like some kind of mountain-splitting knife. Every time, it could shake Huaishi's posture. The green folding knife's trajectory was erratic, and it was impossible to see where it was at all. It was always hidden in Huaishi's blind spot, ready to be launched. Ning can also wield a sword. Huaishi was dumbfounded. He had never seen such a strange border relic. It could even be seized. Ding Nank took advantage of Huaishi's confusion to launch another fierce attack. He clearly had nothing in his hands, but the premonition of death kept warning Huaishi. He must not let him touch him. But as if he could see Huaishi's fear, his attacks suddenly became more unscrupulous. Huaishi's back was even heavily slashed by the black folding knife, leaving a tragic wound. Then it quickly healed. For a mountain ghost, this degree of injury was no different from playing around. However, Huaishi was enraged. "Do you think you're the only one who knows how to seize things?" The young man roared, "Watch my 1 chi into 3 pure ones." As he spoke, Huaishi's body suddenly swayed, and 2 puppets jumped out. Including himself, there were 3 puppets. At first glance, they looked like a group of idols from hell. They were extremely impressive. To save face, Huaishi did not hesitate to throw the 2 submachine guns to the dancing puppets. Then, he suddenly flew up and kicked Qi Wen's back, sending him flying straight toward Ding Nank. "Go!" As if he had thrown out some amazing Pokemon, Huaishi shouted excitedly. Strange weapons, 2-legged bronze men. Ding Nank was stunned. What kind of F*** move was this? How could this person stab his own army in the back? When such a bizarre and despicable act appeared in front of him, even Ding Nank's long-extinguished righteous heart could not help but be filled with righteous indignation. Chapter 385. Even the inhumane border smugglers were stunned by Huaishi's shameless actions. "Damn it, why do you have to hurt the innocent young? Cough, cough, old people." Although he intended to complain in his heart, he didn't hesitate in the slightest. The invisible object in his hand chopped down decisively, splitting Qi Wen from the top of his head to the bottom of his crotch, cleanly cutting him in 2. But as the Yin soul turned into ashes, he also disappeared along with it. Without any warning, it was as if he had evaporated. But the folding knife still whistled in the air, becoming fiercer and fiercer. Huaishi was stunned for a moment, then immediately felt the murderous intent coming at him. Subconsciously, he raised his right hand and clenched it into a fist. Endless gray exploded, and the gray nightmare fog spread out in all directions. It actually outlined a fleeting shadow in the empty air. It was close at hand. Huaishur raised the blade of his sword and blocked, without thinking. But it was too late. He only felt a sharp pain coming from his wrist. An invisible folding knife swept across his wrist, cutting open his artery and leaving deep slash marks on his bones. Blood spurted out and fell into the air. A sinister smile appeared on his face. Ding Nank happily stuck out his tongue and licked it. He was about to praise Huaishur's blood for tasting good when he felt that something was wrong. This blood was poisonous. He didn't have time to speak. He staggered back and coughed violently, spitting out clumps of dark green congealed blood from his lungs and mouth. His face was deathly pale. Border flu, abyss plague, hell's black death, red eye, spirit boiling mushroom. In an instant, countless strains of hell spread out from Huaishur's blood and grew vigorously in his fertile field. Even though he had hurriedly swallowed an entire bottle of antidote, he still felt waves of stabbing pain spreading from his lungs. Despicable. How much poison did you put in your blood? He looked at Huaishur with an increasingly indignant gaze. His figure disappeared without a trace again. Following the attack of the 3 revolving folding knives, he once again approached Huaishur silently. Then he saw Huaishur snap his fingers in disdain. The red gloves picked up the submachine gun and wildly fired in front of him. Huaishur, who was hiding behind the toolman, raised his rapidly healing arm, took out a fist-sized metal ball from his backpack, and threw it forward. Ramses' wrath. In the next instant, seething flames, accompanied by the ignition of source flame, emerged and erupted. The viscous liquid metal fuel poured down like a storm, instantly turning the entire hall into a scorching hot field of fire. In the raging fire, countless ashes danced to form the outline of a startled figure. Huaishur had already stepped forward. You know how to make yourself invisible. Huaishur's TSSSSSSSSS. Then he raised his hand and performed the Orchard Sec's exclusive invisibility spell in front of Ding Nank. Simple, fast, and convenient. There was absolutely no way to break it. The specific process was to first raise your hand, then circle your thumb, ring finger, and pinky finger, straighten your index finger and middle finger, maintain a forked angle, and then aim at the opponent's eyes. Activate the drummer. Bang! Bang! With a crisp shattering sound, Ding Nank screamed. He personally experienced the terror of the orchards. He could no longer see where Huaishur was. Forever. Huaishur swung his sword, knocking away the folding knife stabbing at him from behind. Then he threw his sword into the air. A sacrificial knife appeared between his fingers and slashed at Ding Nank's shoulder. It swept past. Ding Nank's arm flew from his shoulder. The axe of wrath swept across and cleanly cut off his legs. In the end, Huaishur caught the falling sword of virtue with a backhand and cut off his other arm from his body. He then nailed him to the ground. Victory and defeat had been decided. Most importantly, after losing Ding Nank's source, the invisible folding knife and 3 other folding knives fell to the ground. Huaishur quickly put them into his pocket. This was a rare border relic, and it was a set. It was definitely worth a lot of money. As if sensing Huaishur's joy, Chi-1, who had just regained a bit of consciousness in the Nibelungen ring, sent a message to Huaishur. There should be a hidden mezzanine upstairs. HM? Huaishur was surprised. How do you know? The secret door in the monitoring room is double-layered. I've used a similar design before, specifically used to hide important items. Okay, so there was a resonance between the forces of evil. Huaishur couldn't help but sneer. He immediately waved his hand. This kind of thing will cause endless trouble if it gets out, so let me help everyone seal it. Hurry up, how do we go? quickly point the way." As he spoke, Huaishir used the rope of sorrow to tie up Ding Nank on the ground and threw him to the suppression team that had rushed in. Then he ran upstairs. Before going upstairs, he kindly reminded them, "There's danger upstairs. Be careful, don't go near." The suppression team immediately acted as if they were facing a great enemy. No one expected that as soon as they went upstairs, Huaishir's expression would change. He rubbed his hands together expectantly. Every dog has its day. After being an inspector for so long, it's finally my turn to do evil. Cough, cough, that's not right. The Astronomy Association collects stolen goods. How is that called doing evil? Of course, Huaishir would definitely hand over the important items, but if it was just some dirt, well, then he would leave it to himself, who wasn't afraid of being dirty and tired, to deal with it. Luckily, he had a bottomless pit at home. Recently, he had been so poor that he could dig out a 50-cent coin from the ground, wash it, and bring it home. Based on the speed at which Crow was spending money, if he didn't make more money, he would go bankrupt in 2 years. Thinking of this, his movements became even faster. Very quickly, under Chi Wen's guidance, Huaishir directly smashed the wall and the steel plates of the vault. Behind the wall, a sealed space about 2 square meters in size was revealed. Obviously, there had been even more high-end verification equipment, but no matter how high-end the verification equipment and alloy safe were, they couldn't withstand Huaishir's confinement hand. Huaishir's small hand touched it, and directly used alchemy fire to forge a seam in the alloy lock. He didn't even need to open it, and it opened with a gentle pull. Then, his eyes were lit up by a bright golden light. 10 minutes later, Huaishir walked down from upstairs, exhausted. It was as if he had gone through a great battle, and every step was difficult. He waved at the suppression team downstairs. "I've already solved the problem. You can go up now." Under the admiring gazes of his brothers, Huaishir walked out of the door with heavy footsteps. He wasn't afraid of others noticing anything unusual. The safe had long been destroyed by Huaishir. Why was the confinement hand so useful in breaking the law? Then, at the door, he saw the person he was most afraid of now, Director Fu. At this moment, old Fu's iconic pair of large eyes swept over Huaishir, causing Huaishir's expression to become sluggish. He subconsciously felt a little uneasy. What's wrong? Unexpectedly, the corners of old Fu's eyes twitched. He didn't see through Huaishir's guilty conscience. After a long while, he said in a low voice, "Ding Nank is dead." This was too embarrassing. He didn't even want to say it out loud. He had spent a lot of effort to remove a stick and capture the criminal alive. He had even tied him up like a crab and sent him to you. In the end, he was fine in Huaishir's hands, but died when he came to him. In particular, this highlighted his incompetence, which made him even more irritable. On the other hand, Huaishir couldn't help but heave a sigh of relief. Old Fu actually didn't notice his filthy illegal behavior, and Ding Nank was also dead. Didn't that mean no one would know that he had embezzled it? This is great. He couldn't help but blurt out, "What?" Old Fu was stunned and looked over. "Ahem, I mean this is too much. Let me take a look at the scene." Huaishir quickly straightened his face and walked in the direction of the prisoner's van. Soon, he saw the mess on the ground. There were scattered ashes everywhere. From the video, there was no violation of the rules. Everything was carried out according to procedure. However, before the anesthetic was injected, Ding Nank began to struggle with all his might. His lips opened and closed, and he said something silently. Then he grinned. Then a dark green flame rose from his body. Everything he had was burned to ashes. However, it didn't burn the chair cushion or the stretcher. It only left a black mark on the bloody white cloth. What did he say in the end? Huaishir was at a loss. The person who could read lips stared at the video for a long time and was also in disbelief. You'll never know why. The staff repeated Ding Nank's words before he died. Forever, it was expected that he would commit suicide for fear of punishment. However, Huaisher felt that the other party could have escaped, but he ran back in the end. It was a little suspicious that he deliberately sent himself to death. It was as if he deliberately wanted to cut off some clues. He was afraid that he would reveal even the slightest trace and attract anyone's attention. What was he trying to hide? He smelled the scent of a conspiracy. But what did this have to do with him, a cold-hearted inspector? Anyway, it was a case handed over by the Border Administration. The Astronomical Society and the Social Security Bureau jointly cracked down on smuggling at the border. Originally, he didn't expect there to be so many messy things. It was just an ordinary smuggling sweep. Even if there were any accidents, it should be the people at the border who reported the situation here to worry about it. Huaisher had already mastered the skill of throwing the blame to survive in a large organization. He would obediently be his own salary thief and not care about anything that didn't concern him. That's right. He had matured. He was no longer the naive teenager of the past. If he could, he wanted to bring goji berries to work every day. He wanted to drink a cup of tea, smoke a cigarette, and read a newspaper for the entire day. He wanted to paddle into the trench and feel the fish thoroughly. What an ideal life. Now, Huaisher had already begun to think about how to write the report. Otherwise, it would be a waste of his high copywriting skills. Unfortunately, there was nothing to say. It was nothing more than, if the criminals came, he would kill them with one shot. In the end, he decided to copy Old Fu's plan. After all, Old Fu couldn't do anything about it. The joy of being an inspector was so boring and simple. From the beginning to the end, Director Fu felt that something was not right. He always felt that Huaisher looked like a sneaky dog. However, when he saw Yi Zichen stumbling and heavily injured, he couldn't help but feel guilty. He wondered if he had been too strict with Yi Zichen. Moreover, it was too difficult to ride a bicycle back with injuries. He might as well just send him a car. Just like this, after sending Huaisher off, Old Fu sat there smoking. His heart was getting more and more suffocated after a tiring day. He still had to continue to fight with a stupid dog at night to maintain his position as the head of the family. He couldn't help but feel sad. Was life always so painful, or was it only like this in middle age? It's so hard, under the sympathetic gaze of his subordinates. Director Fu sighed sadly for the 32nd time today. End of the second update. The old man thought that a thief had broken in, so he held a double-barreled shotgun with a disdainful expression. When he realized that the person who had climbed over the wall was his young master, he was stunned and puzzled. Why didn't they go through the front door? Of course, it was because there was a metal-swallowing beast at the entrance. It was one thing for Huaisher to be a backstabber, but she had already stepped into the realm of Russian dolls. She was capable of backstabbing others. If she found out that he had returned from raiding their properties, there would be consequences. Huaisher hurriedly raised his finger and shushed him. Then he pointed in the direction of the basement, his expression urgent. Fang Shu turned around to take a look, then gestured to his young master that it was safe. Then Huaisher let out a sigh of relief. He tiptoed to the back of the house and swung the sorrowful rope, pulling him up to the 3rd floor. After the confining hand opened the window, he climbed in and closed the window. He let out a long sigh of relief. He couldn't help but smile excitedly. He rubbed his hands together. Because of the short amount of time, he hadn't carefully looked at what was inside the safe. After confirming that it was a precious item, he had stuffed it into his bag. Now, he could finally take a proper inventory. 10 minutes later, Weischer wiped his sweat and looked at the small mountain of shiny metal on the bed. He still couldn't believe it and wondered if he was dreaming. Oh my, so much pure gold. Pure gold was a gold-like metal created through alchemy. Although it had the same nature as gold, it had a good fusion rate with origin substances. All along, it had been used as a general material for alchemy. It was widely loved and popular, and the demand for it was huge. Other than the fact that its cost was 3 times higher than normal gold, it had no other shortcomings. Because of this, it could be considered a hard currency at the border. It was easier to circulate and use than origin substance crystals, which could easily cost millions or even tens of millions. It was deeply loved by criminals. Looking at the imprint on it, it was actually the alchemy symbol of the Cavendish workshop. In other words, this batch of pure gold was all produced by the smelting center of the Cavendish workshop. As the workshop with the best quality control and mass production, no, it should be called a giant monopoly. The Cavendish workshop not only exported a large number of products, but also accepted various batches of business in the industry, such as OEM, extraction, purification, and so on. It was also one of the largest raw material suppliers in the world. Since it could be stamped with the Cavendish workshop symbol, it proved that the purity of this batch of pure gold was above 99%. It was no wonder that such a small pile was so heavy. According to the tradition of the Cavendish workshop, in its undivided state, each piece of pure gold should weigh exactly 5 kilograms. It should be enough to support a standard, large-scale alchemy operation. Then, the 51 pieces here should be 255 kilograms. After checking the exchange rate of pure gold today and obtaining a price of $5,700 per ounce, he began to calculate. Weischer's hands trembled as he pressed on the computer for a long time, but he still couldn't calculate it. Just as he was getting anxious, he heard a voice behind him. It's about $51,270,000. In East Summer dollars, it's about 250 million. Oh, so that's how it is. Weischer let out a long breath. He could no longer contain his surprise. He was about to express his thanks when he realized who had spoken. His smile froze on his face. It disappeared bit by bit. He turned around and saw Crow, who had landed on his shoulder at some point. She was also looking at Weischer. Her watery eyes blinked as she asked curiously, "My wings are clean. Can I touch your pure gold?" "No, go away." Weischer subconsciously threw himself on the pure gold and glared at Crow. "Come at me if you have any problems. Don't hurt my money." How did this woman know that I was back? And she had so accurately found where I was hiding the money. Young man, women are very sensitive about their private stash of money. Crow whistled happily. It's just like the hair on a man's shoulder, the red mark on his neck, and the perfume on his body. Just by smelling it, you can smell the scent of money. So let me touch it. It's not like I'll lose money by touching it. I don't know if it'll be less if others touch it, but after you touch it, it'll be at least half of it. Weischer widened his eyes. I worked hard to earn this money. Can you earn money by cheating others? I'm doing justice for the heavens. 200 million USD is nothing. You can't even buy a new fighter jet, and you can only buy a castrated version. Crow looked at his idiot sympathetically, shook his head, and sighed. If you really want to talk about expensive, pure gold is the cheapest here. Do you see that little box you threw to the side? It's full of origin substance fragments, crystals formed by forcibly compressing them through the depths of hell. They're lighter than plastic and almost have no mass, but the market price is more than 15 times that of ordinary origin substance crystals. According to a preliminary estimate, it's around 90 million USD. Weischer was dumbstruck. That's amazing. Also, Ding Nank's four-folding, knives have the Clover Workshop logo on them. 4 in a set, each with different effects. The whole set can be rated as an S-rank border relic. Crow assessed, "It doesn't suit you, and you don't lack these weapons. If you choose to resell it, the auction price will be around 80 to 120 million. Weisher sucked in a breath of cold air. He didn't feel that this price was outrageous. After all, once something was stained with an ascendant or a border relic, then there was only one word to describe it: expensive. It was like how the price of ordinary tool pliers would generally double when they became model-specific pliers. Most ascendants didn't lack money, but they also lacked money more than everyone else. Originally, the unlucky Naga that Weisher had hacked to death by Chi when side cost more than 20 million USD to buy 4 curved knives. Moreover, he had to rely on his membership in the Theravada Tantra to buy them. Selling these 4 folding knives for this price was already a conservative estimate. If Weisher was willing to sell the sword of virtue, the price would only be even more exaggerated. It was just that Weisher had never thought of doing so. The hopes and expectations placed on them were simply too precious. It wasn't something that could be bought with money. After doing a preliminary inventory of his haul, Weisher was shocked. 4 or 500 million USD. That was too exaggerated. Crow shook his head. This price is inflated. At least a third of it is tax. Otherwise, no one would smuggle. Weisher didn't understand, but how can a group of smugglers be so rich? It's because you're lucky that you got a big order from them. Okay. Crow rolled his eyes. A group of delivery men who are ready to run away at any time. Even if they have money, they would only deposit it in the magic gold bank. Why would they change it to something so troublesome? In other words, well, you're swallowing all the stolen goods. Weisher's expression twitched. It's just that, with such a large quantity of goods, I'm afraid there aren't many people who can buy it. Crow sighed. And you have no experience in selling stolen goods. If you sell it rashly, you'll definitely be targeted by the large border organization that suffered a loss. Then you'll get into trouble. I don't think I need to say more, right? Weisher rolled his eyes. Can I wait for the limelight to blow over and slowly sell it? Do you have time for that? Crow reminded. Don't forget, you have to advance within half a year. Young man, if you wait until everything calms down and you make a move, it'll be too late. She paused for a moment, and her tone became soft and enthusiastic. And it just so happens that there's an experienced, generous, helpful, and trustworthy friend next to you who can help you solve this small problem. As she spoke, she blinked, leaned closer, and looked at Weisher. Guess who this good person is? Chapter 387. The person you're talking about. Weisher thought for a moment before asking with some uncertainty, It can't be Big Cousin, right? Crow rolled her eyes. Big Cousin my ass. In your heart, I can't even compare to a stinky man. He. Weisher laughed coldly and looked at Crow, who had revealed her true colors. Waiting for me here? Is that right? It's fine if you want my body, but you also want my money. Crow clicked her tongue and said straightforwardly, I'll help you dispose of the pure gold. We'll split it 30 to 70. Is that okay? As soon as she finished speaking, Weisher felt that something was wrong. He frowned. I'll take 70 and you'll take 30? Okay. Crow nodded. Then it's a deal. Weisher's expression twitched again. He had been dragged into this trap by this woman again. Without waiting for him to react, Crow continued, Give me half of that box of origin substance fragments, and I'll help you solve the problem of the blood vengeance crystal. I'll also help you solve the problem of the Lin clan, so you won't have any more worries. That's fine, too. Weisher hesitated for a long time before nodding his head. Logically speaking, the blood vengeance crystal should be the easiest to obtain out of the four materials, but Huaishur had thoroughly offended the Lin clan, the largest producer of the Eastern Summer Country's origin substance. Not only had he offended them, but he had also almost played out some unspeakable scenes on the live broadcast. The Lin clan's people were famous for holding grudges. Even though he said that he wasn't afraid, it was quite tiring to always be on guard against a woman coming to his door and telling him that life was full of ups and downs. Well, that was only if she had the courage to do so. Even though Crow's words weren't reliable, she had never failed to keep her promises. Now that she had spoken, the blood vengeance crystal had been taken care of. That meant that half of the four precious materials Huaishur needed to advance, blood vengeance crystal, divine light of grace, ashes of evil, and undying flames, had been taken care of. But the remaining half was confusing. The rarely seen undying flame and the evil creature ashes that was firmly controlled by the Continuation Academy. One relied on luck, while the other relied on connections. Neither could be dealt with in a short period of time. Although the former wasn't expensive, it was hard to find. Who knew when it would appear? The latter wasn't hard to find. But why would someone sell something that didn't sound like anything good to him? The Continuation Institute itself was a prison, laboratory, and safekeeping organization used to seal and research all kinds of dangerous objects and creatures. If Huaishur's identity wasn't enough, or if he didn't have any official reason, it was absolutely impossible for him to get these things from them. There was a formal reason. Huaishur only needed to say that he wanted to advance, and they would understand. Well, I also found out that this grandson of mine has mastered the secret of the top-tier version of the Heaven's Inquisition Road through an unknown channel. Then I thought about it for a bit. Well, little brother, do you have a friend who has some relationship with the Golden Dawn? Come, have a cup of tea, and we'll talk about it in detail. In the end, Huaishur could only rely on himself. He could not help but let out a long sigh. Is life always so difficult, or is it only when one advances? But I do have a way. The crow blinked its big innocent eyes and jumped in front of him. I can point out the maze for you and find a bright path. Huaishur was alert. What are you up to now? Wow, you're so guarded against your kind big sister. It really makes people's hearts cold, young man. The crow sighed. I'm planning for you with all my heart. As it spoke, 2 drops of disappointed tears fell from its sad face. Before you cry, hide the eye drops under your wings. The effect will be better. Huaishur kindly reminded him before letting out a long sigh. Forget it. Do you think I won't jump into a trap if there's one? Just say it. Hey, this time it's not that big sister deliberately tricked you. The crow rummaged in the pocket of its mini sweater and then pinched a piece of paper with the tip of its wings and unfolded it in front of Huaishur. Huaishur leaned over, narrowed his eyes, and read the words on the paper word by word. Big Li Nan, Feng? Yes, that's right. Big Li Nan. The crow's expression instantly became cartoonish and said with exultation, a few days ago, Big Sister specially did a divination for you. Although I haven't practiced it for many years, after a dozen times, I finally got a result. This is it. The corners of Huaishur's eyes couldn't help but twitch. Hey, don't mess around with my soul's real name and birthday. Even if Huaishur didn't know anything about divination, he knew that repeatedly divining the same question was absolutely a taboo. Even the mystic bird, who was known as the master of destiny, would never divine the same question twice. At the end of the day, divination was to pry into the mysteries of fate. It was like throwing a stone into the darkness to listen for an echo. In all likelihood, it wouldn't have any effect, but if it could be seen even a little bit, it would be worth it. But divination itself would cause disturbances to a person's fate, especially for a mysterious existence like the crow who had a transcendent position. Her rough divination was equivalent to grabbing Huaishur's fate line and pulling it 17 or 18 times in a row. Even if there was a result, the process in the middle would most likely be unrecognizable, and it might even have a considerable negative impact. Who knew what would be the idea of something, or what kind of damned thing he would be entangled in? If he was unlucky, he would be smashed to death by a meteorite, and thousands of years later, his ashes might be made into a border relic related to the young arbiter of life. Don't worry, trust me. The crow raised its wings and patted him on the shoulder. I do this all the time, and you're still alive now, aren't you? Huaishur rolled his eyes and didn't want to talk to her anymore. Then I promise that I won't do anything behind your back anymore, okay? Okay? The crow said in a "I didn't do it on purpose" tone. She almost turned into her human form and grabbed Huaishur's sleeve to apologize pitifully. But before she really did that, Huaishur stopped her. He couldn't take it. For the sake of his heart, he didn't want to argue with her about this. So, if I want to level up quickly, I have to go south. Huaishur rubbed his chin and looked at the note. Then you have to make it clear where I'm going, right? South of Exanhai was Jinhua, south of Jinhua was Fuzhou, south of Fuzhou was Yuezhou, and then out of the border. Or did it mean that he had to go to Myanmar? Or even further, Siam? Even if it was the south, he still had to figure out which direction to go. You don't have to worry about this. I've already arranged it. The crow took out a black card from her small bag and handed it to Huaishur. The Star Luxury Travel Train, a 4-day, 3-night trip. Choose the star, choose nobility. Hurry up and embark on an unforgettable journey that you will never regret. What the hell? Huaishur was confused and didn't know what she was talking about. Holding the black card and looking at it twice, he finally confirmed that it seemed to be a ride card with a star imprinted on it. The design was simple and elegant, and the gilded logo was unforgettable. On the back, there was a very modern QR code. After scanning the QR code, a page automatically popped up. It was an introduction to a luxurious train called the Star, which looked rather contemporary. Be it the old-fashioned black locomotive or the exquisite furnishings and decorations in the private compartments of the train, they all made one feel a strong sense of style from the past. There was a more detailed introduction below, such as the precious creation of the star that was created by a guru-level alchemist with the help of many alchemists, and how unique it was, and how thoughtful and luxurious the internal food and drinks were. The most important thing was that now that it had been revised, it had embarked on a new journey again. It would follow a new route, and within 4 days and 3 nights it would take passengers to shuttle between the present realm and various borders, allowing them to enjoy the spectacular scenery of hell and let the guests enjoy this unique and wonderful journey. Huaishur's eyes widened, and he almost broke down. Isn't this just a F***King tour group? It's a luxury tour group. The crow corrected. 4 days and 3 nights will cost $3 million. Huaishur sneered and shook his head. Who would spend $3 million on this thing? Of course. The crow raised his wings and pointed at him. For example, I won't. Huaishur habitually refused. Although he knew that it was useless, he just didn't want to spend any money on this damn thing. Even if I don't have a car, I'll carry my own luggage and walk all the way to Siam. I won't take this damn thing. But this train will stop at the permanent neutral border, Shambhala, and all the guests will get a VIP invitation to an auction. The crow said calmly, in this auction, there is a high probability that something like the ashes of the evil creature will appear, and there will definitely be undying flames. Well, you can also sell these folding knives. Really? In the silence, Huaishur gritted his teeth and didn't speak. After a long time, he finally sighed, helplessly. I'm so fragrant, okay? I'm scared of you. You just want me to go here and buy the things back. No wonder this black-hearted woman didn't take away all my money. She kept the money for herself so that he could run errands for the auction. Don't worry, I'll go with you. Crow leaned over, her voice becoming sweet and charming as she whispered in his ear, going on a 4-day and 3-night sweet trip with a beautiful and cute big sister, and sleeping in the same room at night. Isn't it exciting? Isn't it exciting? Maybe some embarrassing things will happen. Huaisha rolled his eyes. Lying on the bed, he didn't want to talk to her anymore. Chapter 388. Awesome. In the evening, Huaisha scrutinized the notice posted outside the waiting room and was dumbfounded. Even the luxury train will be late. It's just late. It's not an explosion. There are bound to be things that no one wants to happen. Crow, who was on his shoulder, said calmly, besides, if the train really had to leave on time, it would have left yesterday. How can you make it in time to buy a ticket today? To be honest, I have a hunch that this lousy train will really explode. Huaisha rubbed the space between his eyebrows, pushed the door open, and entered. Then, he felt the strange atmosphere in the exclusive waiting hall of the Star. It was completely different from what he had expected. There was no warm atmosphere, no relaxed chatter, and no scene of a family of 3 traveling together happily. There was only coldness and solemnity as they guarded against each other. What's going on? Huaisha's face twitched, and he froze at the door. 12 hours ago, after unhappily deciding on this impromptu, sweet trip, Huaisha took out his mobile phone and applied for leave on the internal application of the Astronomical Society. At the same time, he also saw his poor attendance rate. If his salary could be deducted, then his salary for the next year would be deducted. However, Huaisha didn't care. Who asked him to have so much pure gold in his pocket? He was rich. To his surprise, the leave was approved very quickly. This time, the Jinling administration was exceptionally generous. Even though Huaisha had casually filled in the excuse of a border trip, they still gave him a full 10 days. Could it be that they had considered the fact that Huaisha had just risked his life to complete a big task, and thus specially gave him a leave of absence? Thinking about it this way, the Astronomical Society was not as heartless as he thought. Occasionally, they would sympathize with the low-level employees. However, not long after, Chai Fei, who was far away in Jinling, sent him the coordinates of a restaurant on WeChat. She also attached a smiling emoji and asked him, "Can you ask the kind-hearted person who approved your leave for a sponsor partnership?" The corners of Huaisha's mouth twitched. "Then, can you please return my gratitude to the organization just now?" Most of Huaisha's impression of the Jinling branch came from Ai Qing, who claimed to be her best friend, but Ai Qing never acknowledged her as her best friend. The main reason was that this big sister's skill in skiving was simply too high, and from the bottom of their hearts, they respected her as the strongest. Not only could he slack off, but he could also bring others along with him. It was just like running a dungeon. He was just short of starting a slacking training class and becoming the little helper of every group to slack off. Most importantly, he was easy to talk to. As long as he treated her to a meal, all the procedures would be easily settled. The restaurant she sent was not expensive per person, but the heat from the pictures made Huaisha's eyes twitch wildly. All right. Chai Fei wasn't even afraid. So why was he worried for her? After the takeout was sold, he successfully received an increase in Chai Fei's favorability towards him. He also received an occasional tip. The end of the year is the month of statistics, and the accountants in the bureau will have to work overtime for a long time. And before that, please remember to quickly spend this year's budget. Thus, Huaisha unceremoniously used public funds to book the rest of the trip. His movements were skillful and fast, without the slightest hesitation. It was not until after the booking that he noticed the strange gaze of Crow next to him. "Yes, what's wrong?" "No, I'm just wondering." Crow shook his head and sighed. Where did the refreshing and upright young man go? Let me think. He was probably angered to death by a crow. Huaisha rolled his eyes and looked at her. "We are also looking for the criminal. Do you have any clues?" "I don't see him. Maybe you're looking in the wrong place." "Is that so?" "Yes, yes." Thus, the night passed without a word. The next day, Huaisha got up early in the morning, picked up his luggage, and began his day-long journey. First, he took a train to the train station, then the high-speed train to Jinling. Then he took a special underground line in Jinling to the nearest public border, Stone City. Yes, it was the place where Huaisha decided to run away with his boss. As a large open border, Stone City's internal development was quite advanced, and there were many things in the discovery realm. At the same time, the location was also within the range of the big secret, so safety and order were guaranteed. After years of continuous immigration, the population had successfully exceeded 300,000 and could almost be regarded as a peripheral town of Jinling, although a small number of ordinary people who came to the border would have a period of time when they were not acclimatized. But after so many years, no matter what the situation was, there were already measures and plans to deal with it. Nothing major would happen, and they would be able to adapt in about a week. Therefore, the streets were full of people coming and going, and it looked very lively. It was not much different from the Discovery realm. The most obvious difference was the endless sea that was always gray and gloomy above his head, right? Huaisha stood at the entrance and looked up at the distant waves and sails above his head. The absurd illusion of heaven and earth being upside down made him feel a little lightheaded. No matter how many times he saw it, he could not adapt. Will it really not collapse? Huaisha could not help but scratch his chin. He was full of worry. Huaisha sighed and glanced at the strange atmosphere in the waiting room. And what is this situation? In the waiting room, it was solemn and cold. There was no soft atmosphere, and there was not even the slightest bit of cheerfulness when people went out for a trip. When Huaisha pushed the door open and entered, the people sitting on the chairs suddenly looked over, their calm expressions faintly containing vigilance. After seeing that the newcomer was just an unarmed teenager, most of them withdrew their gaze. The remaining small group of people looked at his face, as if they had seen it somewhere before. Soon, some of them withdrew their gaze as if they had been electrocuted, and a few of them became more and more vigilant. It was as if they regarded Huaisha as a potential enemy. Most of the people who were traveling with him hated him as soon as he entered the door. Huaisha was confused. What the hell was going on? "Are you not aware of how famous you are?" Crow shook his head. "For someone like you who has an organization, a unit, insurance, and a fixed annual leave every year, a double year-end salary, and an extra year-end bonus. You are also a lackey of the Astronomy Society who has been on TV before. Everyone has the right to punish you, okay?" After Huaisha heard this, he felt that this group of people's hatred was F***king reasonable. He wanted to hid himself a little. "Anyway, find a seat first." Crow withdrew his gaze. "In a few minutes, the bus will be here. I will explain it to you when we get on the bus." Huaisha looked around. He found that most of the luxurious waiting room, which was decorated and displayed like a cafe, was already full of people, and Huaisha did not want to sit with those who were hostile to him. There was only one seat next to the table in the corner, but there was another person sitting there, his back facing Huaisha. He could only see a bowl of noodles in front of him and an old briefcase under the chair. He was wearing a gray suit that was not very high-end. He was also the only person who did not turn around when he heard Huaisha push the door open. He was completely focused on eating his noodles. It was as if he was enjoying something delicious. Huaisher walked over and asked softly, "Can I sit here?" The man who was eating the noodles slowly raised his head, causing Huaisher to suck in a breath of cold air. He was shocked. The greasy feeling that hit him in the face, the listless and numb breath, the pale face that seemed to be ready to die on the street at any time, and the eye-catching dark circles under his eyes. How many overtime hours did he work? He clearly did not look old, only 30 years old, but the roots of his hair were already showing signs of gray. "Big brother, where did you come from, you bastard from?" After seeing Huaisher, the other party seemed to be stunned for a moment. The man in the gray suit looked at the young man in front of him, and then looked at Crow on his shoulder. Soon, he politely pulled out a chair. "Both of you, please sit." Even when he spoke, there was a lingering tiredness in his voice. Then he lowered his head and continued to eat his noodles. He ate attentively and sweetly, slowly tasting it, as if there was a peerless delicacy in front of him that could be eaten for 24 hours. Chapter 389. In fact, the bowl of noodles was quickly finished. Although he looked a bit like a social animal, he had an indescribable charm when he was eating. Even if she were to watch him eat, she would be able to empathize with him and experience the sweetness and contentment. After drinking the soup in one gulp, the man in the gray suit finally raised his head. He wiped his mouth, and a trace of redness appeared on his pale face. "I've been working overtime. Recently. I'm exhausted." He smiled at Huaisher embarrassedly. "Sorry about that. Are you going on a trip?" Huaisher's eyes twitched. Until now, he realized this man seemed to be able to see the crow, but the crow pretended that it was really a crow and did not know what he was talking about. It looked left and right and just ignored him. The man in the gray suit didn't say anything to her. Instead, he suggested to Huaisher, "There's still half an hour before the car starts. Do you want to have a bowl of noodles?" Huaisher was puzzled. "The noodles here are pretty good. Although the soup is a bit ordinary, the noodles are handmade. It should be made with old noodles. The texture is completely different from the yeast, and it's very chewy. The side dishes are also..." Speaking of food, the man in the gray suit became happy, as if he was talking about the best thing in the world, and his eyebrows danced. After he finished speaking, Huaisher shook his head awkwardly. "No, forget about that. I came after eating." "Ah, that's a pity." The man in the gray suit shook his head, regretfully. Then he remembered that he didn't greet him. "Sorry, I haven't asked yet. What's your name?" "Huaisher. Nostalgic Hui. Hui as in Huaishu, sure as in sure. Really? Hui. Sure." The man inexplicably pondered for a while, as if he wanted to focus on memorizing the name. But after that, he didn't mention his name. He didn't know if it was intentional or if he forgot. While waiting for the bus, the two of them chatted casually. Soon, Huaisher found that the two actually got along very well. Even though it was the first time they had met, unexpectedly, there was no estrangement or distance between them. Instead, it was as if they were old friends who had not seen each other for a long time. Although this guy looked like a social animal who was about to die from working overtime, when he spoke, he always made people feel that he was sincere and happy. Huaisher could feel his salted fish soul resonating. It was like a strange setting that would only appear in comics. The slacker would always meet another slacker, and then everyone would happily exchange their experiences of slacking. Huaisher was too engrossed in the conversation. He was completely oblivious to the strange expressions on the faces of the other passengers. No one came to disturb their conversation. No, it should be said that he instinctively chose to stay away. Anyone with the slightest bit of intuition would be able to sense something. Apart from the haggard face of the man who was working overtime, there was also a gloomy atmosphere surrounding the man in the gray suit, as well as an ominous aura that seeped out from his bones. It sounded like someone was knocking on the door in the middle of the night. It made one's heart palpitate. It was too late to avoid it. Unconsciously, everyone was intentionally or unintentionally distancing themselves. In the end, it formed a clear boundary that even Huaishir was aware of. More than half of the waiting room was empty. What's going on? Huaishir looked at the strange appearance of those people in astonishment. He thought for a while, carefully analyzed, and then suddenly realized, was he being isolated? So, abruptly, she encountered the legendary cold violence between people in society. Why? Had his reputation unknowingly become so bad outside? Or was it really like what Crow said, that the seals of the Astronomical Society should be killed by everyone? I'm a prince of the paradise. It's okay that I'm outdated, but you guys are too much to resist me like this. Probably because of me. The man in the gray suit seemed to know what he was thinking and shrugged slightly. Most people don't like to deal with people like me. After all, I usually don't have any good intentions when I visit. Huaishir was curious. Are you some kind of killer? Although he felt that he shouldn't have any fighting power, one couldn't judge a book by its cover. It was said that this kind of setting was popular now. The seemingly inconspicuous courier brother was actually a retired soldier king who was walking on the road of saving the world with an internet cable. Even a middle school student could be reincarnated into a different world to become a Buddha. The world had changed. Everyone was not quite the same as what they appeared to be. No, this is too exaggerated. The man in the gray suit shook his head awkwardly. You can see that I don't have any fighting power when you look at me like I'm going to die sooner or later. I'm a clerk. He paused for a moment, deliberating his words, and calmly said, in the past, I could still be regarded as your colleague, right? But after I resigned from the Astronomical Society and became unemployed, I was not very popular. I could only do odd jobs, like delivering letters to make a living. These words were full of bitterness. Huaishir couldn't help but sympathize with him from the bottom of his heart. Actually, there's nothing good about the Astronomical Society now. He sighed. Even if I stay, I'll be a tool all day. If I'm unlucky enough to have a boss with a bad temper, I'll suffer even more. It's fine if I'm exhausted, but ever since the failure of the last expedition, my boss suddenly blacklisted me. Now I feel like I've become an invisible person in the workplace. It's almost the new year, and I don't even have a ribbon fish. It's not easy to go out for a swim. Yes, it used to be like this. At the mention of this, the man in the gray suit sighed empathetically. When you joined the company, I told you that you would never work overtime and would be well paid. Only after you joined did you realize that you would never take a break. Every day, you would pour tea and water and run errands for others. The people above would casually throw tasks at you, and you couldn't finish writing reports every day. If you weren't careful, you would work overtime until the end of the world. At the end of the day, you still had to stand on the last shift with your boss. Now that I think about it, it's so miserable. How did I get through it? Yes. Huaishir nodded from the bottom of his heart. In a moment of carelessness, the two of them had surprisingly reached a consensus in some wonderful aspects. This world was really wonderful. Happy times always passed very quickly, just like the limited activities of the ancient travel company in the past. If you weren't careful, it would end. A faint roar came from the railway outside the waiting room, and the sound of a steam whistle sounded. It gradually approached, and the train was about to enter the station. At this moment, the door of the waiting room opened again. Huaishir stiffened for a moment. He heard the illusory sound of wind and snow blowing from the door behind him, mixed with the low echo of an avalanche and an iceberg colliding. The cold wind was bone-chilling. But soon, as the door closed, the sudden chill dissipated. Only the low sound of footsteps sounded. Huaisher turned his head and saw two passengers walking in under the dim yellow light. No matter who it was, when they first looked over, their eyes would fall on the middle-aged man walking in front. As if he came from the country of ice and snow, the slightly old man was wearing a heavy coat. Even if there was not a single snowflake, one could still feel the coldness and hardships of the journey. There was no expression on his calm face, nor was he handsome or conspicuous. Only his pair of gray eyes were different from others. It was like a bonfire burning in a snowstorm, constantly rising with a vigorous flame. It was so cold that people couldn't look at it directly. The only imperfection might be the top of his head after he took off his hat. His smooth scalp was surrounded by sparse hair, reflecting the soft light on the ceiling. It was slightly awkward. Behind him, the young man who helped him carry his luggage didn't have any sense of presence. He followed behind him step by step, like a follower. But Huaisher always felt that the young man seemed to have seen him somewhere before. He looked strangely familiar, but he couldn't remember it for a while. Just as he was deep in thought, the man in front of him was already walking straight towards him, step by step. There was no hesitation or confusion. Finally, his footsteps stopped beside the table, and he nodded slightly to the man in the gray suit. "Long time no see." He spoke in Latin, but with a hint of Russian Federation accent. It was hard to tell where he came from. Only after he walked closer, Huaisher finally realized that the man was very tall, at least 2 meters. He stood in front of the table with his back to the light, and his huge shadow covered the entire corner. It was like a big stone pressing on people's hearts, making it difficult to breathe. However, the man in the gray suit was not affected. His face was as usual, but it seemed that it was a little strenuous for him to raise his head and speak, "Long time no see. It seems that it's you again this time." "It shouldn't be." The dignified middle-aged man thought for a while and shook his head disdainfully. "But even if it has nothing to do with me, it should be blamed on me in the end, right?" The man in the gray suit nodded in agreement. "After all, it's rare to see an unlikable person like you." During the conversation, the middle-aged man glanced at the young man next to him and seemed a little surprised. "Your friend?" "We just met." The man in the gray suit shrugged. "You don't have to think too much. He has nothing to do with a jinx like me." "Is that so?" The middle-aged man turned his head and looked at the young man sitting in the chair in front of him. "Then let me give you a piece of advice, Mr. Huaisher." He called out Huaisher's name so abruptly. It was as if he had known him for a long time. He said, "For the sake of the peaceful and happy life you're pursuing, it's best to stay away from the person next to you, and you should pray that this guy will never appear in front of you. It's not a good thing to be involved with him, just like being involved with the astronomy club." The advice came out of the blue, but the contempt in the words made Huaisher feel a burst of displeasure. It was as if he was reprimanding an ignorant child. So, in his shadow, Huaisher raised his head and looked at the dignified face. What a coincidence! The young man suddenly laughed. "I also have a piece of advice." As he spoke, his hand reached into the saddlebag and grasped something heavy. Behind the middle-aged man, his follower's expression changed slightly. He wanted to step forward, but was stopped by the middle-aged man's raised hand. That person didn't care about Huaisher's hostility and actions. Instead, he waited with great interest to see what kind of weapon Huaisher could take out and what kind of killer move to challenge him. He was overestimating his own capabilities. In the end, a bundle of gift bags sealed in plastic film appeared in front of him, making him stare and freeze in place. Looking at his bald head, the young man suggested word by word, "You should try the new Overlord." Chapter 390. The cold wind came suddenly. It was as if there was a knife at the back. At that moment, the whole waiting hall seemed to be buried by an iceberg. Everyone felt that their consciousness was frozen by the sudden chill. Then, in the faint thunder that burst out in a trance, they felt dizzy and collapsed in their seats. Death came for no reason. Amidst the immense fear, even the screams froze in their hearts. Only coldness spread in their hearts, and the tyrannical sound of thunder reverberated in their souls. When they turned their heads stiffly in the cold, they saw the back of the figure standing in the corner. It was as if they were looking at death itself, and their eyes stung. They closed their eyes with difficulty. They felt the cold blood flowing from the corner of their eyes. It was just an illusion. It was just an illusion, but the injury at the moment was so real. Even the frozen and necrotic black spots quickly appeared on his hands and feet. The angry thunder echoed in the soul, and his consciousness became hazy. This was because the middle-aged man had raised his eyes slightly. That pair of gray eyes had mercilessly destroyed everything. Huaisher felt as if he was going to die again. But fortunately, he had already begun to get used to it. Only the premonition of death screamed crazily in the soul. The mirror of nothingness was dark, and nothing was reflected. It told him a simple and straightforward result. If he was the enemy of this person, then there was no possibility of any accident. Huaisher was dead. Under his gaze, the heavy burden was imposed on Huaisher's consciousness layer by layer, as if pressing his head and drowning him in the bottomless ice sea. He sank inch by inch. Death was getting closer and closer. From beginning to end, Huaisher didn't move, just looked at him. Achoo! The dead silence was suddenly broken. The man in the gray suit shivered and sneezed with a pale face. However, the illusion that could kill any spirit was suddenly dispelled. "Sorry, you have a tissue?" He rubbed his nose awkwardly, raised his head, and looked at the middle-aged man. Until the middle-aged man waved his hand, the attendant behind him came forward, took out a pack of tissue from his pocket, and handed it to him. "Thank you so much." The man in the gray suit blew his nose in surprise and let out a long breath. "There's no need to make such a fuss. Gray-robed man, do you think I would bully a child?" The middle-aged man glanced at him mockingly before looking at Huaisher. "I was only going to punish you lightly, but you didn't pee your pants out of fear. You have some guts." As he spoke, he reached out and picked up the shampoo gift box on the table. After weighing it in his hand, he revealed a strange smile. "After so many years, this is the first time I've received a gift from someone from the Astronomy Society. No, just treat it as a temporary ransom for letting you go. Put away the reviews." As he spoke, he threw the box to the attendant behind him. The young man who seemed to have heard of this name picked up the box in his hand and looked at the 2 words written on it, as if it was the first time he had seen it. He asked curiously, "Father, is this useful?" "Of course it's useless. Idiot." The middle-aged man slapped the back of his head and reprimanded, "I've already used it. It's all a lie. Modern people's things are all so gaudy. In the end, it's useless, making people look forward to it in vain." "Then why do we still need this thing? Aren't we going to Shambhala to see your second brother? The duck that we brought along was eaten by me on the way. It's not good to be empty-handed. I heard that he has started to lose his hair recently. If we give this to him, he will be very happy. It's not good to lie to him like this, right? Idiot, this is called fatherly love. How is this lying? And he has lied to us a lot over the years. By the way, how much money do you have? Let's change to another bus." "But the fare is so expensive. How did I teach you to be so stingy? You still dare to sit in the same bus as that scourge. Aren't you afraid of dying young? After reprimanding and arguing, the two men turned around and walked to the platform. The conversation gradually faded away. It disappeared. It was not until 5 minutes later that Huaisher woke up from his daze. He felt cold sweat seeping out from his back. He heard Crow's admiring sigh in his consciousness. "You're so brave, young man. With your perfect ability to seek death, I won't be able to beat you soon." Huh. Huaisher did not react. Crow chuckled softly. "Don't you know who was talking to you just now?" "Who?" Huaisher was puzzled. He immediately jumped up from the chair and said in disbelief, "Wait, the person beside him just now. Reputation? Isn't that the bastard who hit me in Jinling?" "Yes, it's him." Crow glanced at him pitifully. "And the person who just spoke to you and was thoroughly offended by you is his adoptive father, the most wanted criminal in the entire realm, the culprit behind the fall of the kingdom of heaven, the uncrowned king known as the eighth of the seven natural enemies, the greatest threat to the Astronomical Association, and the ultimate boss of Green Sunday. Oh my God." As soon as he stood up, Huaisher felt his legs go soft, and he almost fell to the ground. He was shivering. It was as if he was used to repeatedly jumping sideways, but in the end, he accidentally jumped onto the Tyrannosaurus Rex's face. Furthermore, he even danced the entire New Treasure Island song in his mouth before leaving with small steps while singing and dancing. It was only after he came to his senses that he realized how close he was to death. "You have to think on the bright side." Crow comforted him. "This can be considered a tribulation for the time being." For so many years, not many people in the Astronomical Society have been able to leave alive from his hands. You're equivalent to getting rid of half of your bad luck here. Well, at least half of it is. Isn't this your doing? Huaisher was furious. He did not care about being angry with her and took out his phone from his pocket. "What are you doing?" "Reporting." Huaisher replied in a trembling voice. "Reporting terrorists is the duty of every member of the Astronomical Society. Save it. It's useless." Crow sneered. If he was so easy to deal with, would he still be considered a big problem for the Astronomical Society? As long as he doesn't enter the present realm, the Astronomical Society can't do anything to him. No, now it seems that guy has already come out of the present realm. I understand now. Huh, how do you understand now? Huaisher widened his eyes and looked at her, not knowing what she was thinking. "I understand the source of your stolen goods. Now that I think about it, I understand." "Ha ha, idiot, you did the right thing this time. You swallowed Green Sun's goods." Crow was overjoyed. That guy Ding Nank should be one of Green Sun's agents in the present realm. "Ha ha, on the surface, he is a smuggler, but in fact, he is secretly a member of Green Sun. With the new and old grudges, your reputation in Green Sun has probably reached the point where you won't rest until you die, right? Maybe in a few years, even the Astronomical Society will give you the title of Green Sun's nemesis." Huaisher's face had turned green as Green Sunday. It was as if he had already seen his future miserable death in some corner, and he didn't even want to move. "Is it too late for me to go home now?" "You've already bought the ticket." Crow patted his head with pity. "They won't refund it." Huaisher was silent for a moment and made a painful decision. "It's just 500,000. I'll just grit my teeth and throw it into the water." "Wait, why is it 500,000? Crow sensed that something was wrong. "Isn't it 3 million? Huaisher's expression stiffened, and he subconsciously avoided Crow's gaze. "Well, this is a bit. It's a long story. You see, I was thinking 4 days and 3 nights is not long. Well, then I thought, why should I spend 3 million just for a moment of comfort, right?" Crow frowned. "So?" Huaisher coughed twice and said embarrassedly, "So, ahem, bought a standing ticket. Silence, a long silence. Crow was dumbfounded, not knowing whether to be astonishment or admiration. He couldn't help but sigh. "You're really a little genius." "Who said I wasn't?" Weisher shyly turned her head away, feeling a little embarrassed, although he agreed with this point. He also knew that although he was good at everything, his only shortcoming was that he was too thin-skinned and couldn't be praised too much. But after being scared like this, he really couldn't take it anymore. He didn't want to get on the bus from the bottom of his heart. He didn't want to waste the $500,000. Seeing that the people in the waiting hall were so fierce, and even the boss of Green Sun came and left, he was really afraid that this was another survival game, full of villains. This broken car, don't tell me there's a hidden setting that only one person can reach the destination alive. Weisher expressed doubts from the bottom of his heart. Crow sighed helplessly. "I say, have you been persecuted too many times? Did it cause PTSD and paranoia?" "No, I just have a phobia of large vehicles. You can understand that, right? What if there's a murder on the Orient Express, a massacre on the Southern Express, or something like that? Wouldn't I be in trouble? If there's a bomb, I won't be able to run away. At this time, you should bring out your stubborn style." Crow glared at him. "Forget it. I'll give you a suggestion." Do you see this worker who looks like he's about to die from overwork?" After only a short moment of conversation, Crow raised his wings and pointed to the pale man in the gray suit next to him, the middle-aged worker known as the man in gray. "As long as you stay with him all the way, even if the whole car blows up, you won't lose a single hair." "That powerful?" Weisher was a little incredulous. Crow nodded. "Yes, that's how powerful he is. But who is he?" It was obvious that someone who could talk and laugh with the boss of Green Sun was definitely not an ordinary character, right? Crow glanced at him mischievously. "Do you really want to know?" Weisher hesitated, noticing Weisher's curious gaze. The man in gray, who had been waiting for a long time, was stunned for a moment. He tried to squeeze out a gentle smile, but it couldn't hide the salted fish smell under the exhaustion of the worker. "He looks like he's about to die from overwork at any time. He doesn't look like a peerless master. So, don't worry about it. You don't need to know too much. Just know that he's harmless to you." Crow patted him on the shoulder and comforted him. "To tell you the truth, although this guy is a little unlucky, he's actually more harmless than anyone else. You can rest assured about this." Crow concluded decisively. "He's the only one who won't try to hurt anyone." It was rare to get such a serious guarantee from Crow. This made Weisher feel relieved, but at the same time, he was suspicious again. "You're really not hiding anything from me, right?" No. Crow shook his head like a rattled drum. "Why would I hide this kind of thing from you? This time, I've respected your opinion enough and told you everything I know." "Really? Really?" Crow's eyes widened. His watery eyes were full of sincerity. "I can swear." So, Weisher finally felt relieved and prepared to get in the car. He didn't notice that Crow on his shoulder quietly breathed a sigh of relief.